Anyway, so basically, Frank, these Substacks just take a moment for people to join. I've been doing it once a month. Once a month. What's wrong with me? Once a week, and covering a lot of things with people I really respect. And I'm so delighted, everyone. This is such a thrill that one of my favorite people on the planet and one of the best writers I know, and yes, I am going on, Frank, is Frank Bruni. He's a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times. He's worked for the Times for more than 25 years. He's also in academia now because he's a professor of public policy at Duke University. And I have some friends whose kids went to Duke, and they said that they were afraid of you, Frank.
Why? Am I
I
that
think that
scary? Why?
I
How
think
am I
maybe
scary?
I think, that they want to do well, and I think, they get nervous because you're so smart and so great and so thoughtful. I love Frank's newsletter, by the way. That how often does your newsletter come out, Frank?
Once a week, every Monday morning.
Anyway, it's a terrific newsletter, always fun to read, and always great to get Frank's perspective, which we're going to do today. So, people who are paid subscribers, feel free to comment, ask any questions of Frank, and let's just get started because there's so much to cover, Frank, every day. It's really hard to keep up with it. And I guess one of the things we wanted to talk to you about is Mark Zuckerberg because he was on the stand today in a landmark lawsuit alleging that social media platforms are addicted and harmful to kids, something that he has refuted in the past. You wrote a book called The Age of Grievance, which I highly recommend to all the people on this platform. But in that book, you argued that these platforms don't just connect us, they warp our politics and our psychology. Do you think we are starting to reach a turning point with how we view technology and holding these tech companies accountable, Frank?
I absolutely think we do. That's a great thing to bring up. And I think part of what's accelerated that is AI. AI is such a scary manifestation and metaphor, for what we're facing in terms of technology taking over our lives and changing them in ways we don't necessarily intend. That I think it has us looking at the whole panoply of it. It has us looking backward at things like social media. I give enormous credit to my friend, I think our friend Jonathan Haidt, for the way he's pushed this forward. He's been talking about smartphones in schools, but that's just a piece of the puzzle, and I think people are looking beyond that puzzle, as is he, and realizing that we are letting ourselves be used and changed by technology, by social media, now AI, in ways that we don't intend. And if we don't kind of pause, think about how to control that, think about how we might want to regulate that, rules we might want to develop, we're going to lose the moment and lose a lot more than that.
Well, I wonder about that, Frank. There's a very scary article making the rounds. I'll post it on my Substack or do a link. And in fact, in the middle of the night, when I woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep because I was so upset about so many things, I thought about reading it and rereading it. But in essence, there have been a couple of articles that have come out recently, Frank. I think one in the Atlantic. I think the Atlantic one said Democrats and Republicans agree that we are not ready for AI. And this other one, obviously, that has everyone very nervous is sort of how it's really going to change the landscape in terms of jobs and the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And, I worry, frankly, that we're not doing enough to prepare for this. We're not talking about basic universal income. We're not talking about this massive shift in the employment landscape that is going to happen not, Frank, in 5 years, but in like a year or two. I think people are starting to wake up to it, but are you still concerned that the guardrails and the way that the US and for that matter, other countries are preparing for the sea change is just not happening?
I'm hugely concerned, in part because this is a moment, this is exactly what government is supposed to do, right?
Right.
This is a moment when, whether you are Republican, Democrat, whether you're a big government or a small government person, this is when you need government to do some really intelligent investigation, to make some, to debate some really interesting, to intelligently debate possible solutions and to come up with some. Because I think we all agree we are going to need to restrain AI significantly. But in what ways? To what extent? How soon should we do that? Only government can decide those things. Only government has the power to do those things. And I'm concerned because we're at a moment in history where Western democracies are not functioning efficiently. Our governments are not getting things done. They're sclerotic. They are riven by division. That costs us all the time. But on this frontier, I think it may cost us in magnitudes greater than it does in terms of healthcare, et cetera. And we need to get government working again in order to have any chance here. Now, you mentioned Republicans and Democrats both being concerned. One point of hope here is in an era of almost no bipartisan consensus, a very little bipartisan comedy. It is the case that there are discussions across the aisle about this, and there's a recognition that this is suprapartisan, that this is beyond partisan politics. It's bigger and more important than that. So maybe there's some hope there.
And you mean comedy like COMITY?
Which I may have utterly pronounced. One of the reasons I try to stick to the keyboard, Katie, I'm not good like
No,
you
I
are
think
on
you
camera,
pronounced it correctly.
is
No,
I'm a champion speller, but I can't pronounce anything.
no, comedy is right, but it sounded like comedy, but it's comedy. And you also said sclerotic, which is a word I looked up recently. I don't know if it was because of one of your columns, but somebody used it. Explain what sclerotic means, because I think it means all over the place. Is that right?
No, it actually means constipated.
Oh,
Unless I'm wrong. I could be wrong about that. But
I looked it up anyway.
isn't
Summed it up.
isn't the medical condition of sclerosis about cloggedness, or have I had this wrong all this time?
No, I
I'm
sclerotic. I'm
beclowning
going to look
myself.
it
I'm
up in
beclowning
real
myself on my
time.
Substack. Bad.
Sclerotic. Because, hardened, rigid, or stiffened, typically referred to tissue affected by sclerosis or to a rigid, unresponsive system. So, sclerotic, I guess, is rigid and unresponsive. And I guess maybe the medical definition refers to the hardening of body tissues, often due to inflammation, increased fibrous tissue, or aging. If that's the case, I'm very sclerotic these days.
I didn't know this was going to turn into a medical video.
Anyway, I love words and I love how you use words, and I'm always looking words up. So thank you for that. So basically, rigid and unflexible and ill prepared to deal with the challenges of AI. And Robin says, hey, he teaches at Duke. I know my safety's just kidding, Frank. I couldn't
But
get into it.
but while we're on AI, and since you mentioned Duke, et cetera, I mean, one of the reasons I think I'm even more attuned to this in some ways than other people is I'm around young people who understand full well that they can't make intelligent job choice decisions, intelligent decisions about their majors. They're in a world where when it comes to jobs and what's even going to need a human presence is changing so quickly. Imagine being back in college at that moment and trying to decide, what do I major in? What courses do I take? How do I make myself bigger, smarter, in ways that are going to have meaning 5 or 10 years from now? When what I'm seeing is this sort of is this bullet train of technology changing the world more quickly than I can make decisions to keep up with. I can't tell you how hard it is to watch students go through that. They're trying to plan their lives, um, and the world is moving too quickly for them to do that in any sort of coherent or intelligent way.
And Frank, we've already heard about how hard it is for a lot of these kids who have graduated from college to find entry level positions. We're hearing much more about vocational education, jobs that are kind of AI resistant. I'm just curious that at a wonderful school like Duke, what are you telling these kids?
I'm telling them something that is going to sound sort of banal and maybe is going to sound like an evasive cop out, but that I do really believe. You are never worse off for being smarter. You're never worse off for being able to make better arguments, absorb information in more sophisticated ways. You're never worse off to be a better communicator, to be the person in the room who can articulate what you were all just talking about the most smoothly and quickly. who can tell the best stories. And by that, I mean, when you're starting a new company and you're going to venture capitalists, you're telling a story about yourself. You're telling a story about the company. There are skills, dispositions, orientations that I think are technology resistant. So I say, worry less about how this class is going to draw a straight line to X, Y, or Z job because you don't know what the jobs are. Worry about being the most nimble thinker and the smoothest communicator and the kind of most balanced, mature person you can be, because that's never not going to serve you. Does that feel like a cop out or does that feel true to you, Katie?
I think it feels true to me, Frank, but it does feel like a bit of a cop out because I think that in addition to being a skilled communicator, to being smart, to being nimble, to adjust to kind of new ways of doing things and new methods of learning or communicating, I mean, the very real issue is how are these people going to earn a living, right? And I'm just curious, maybe not in the next year or two, but as they think about a career path in the next 5 years. So I guess. And I guess the fact of the matter is, Frank, there's no easy answer. Like you can't say, go west, young man, plastics or whatever it is you're going to advise these kids. But I do wonder, thank you for the people who got the graduate reference, but I
I was
do
just,
wonder I do wonder though, um, what kind of guidance they're actually getting. I mean, I agree 100% with what you said, but I also, if I were graduating, I'd be like, yeah, thanks, Frank, but what else have you got for me?
well, I mean, I don't have anything else because I can't tell them to go major in computer science. That was the major that was exploding all over the country. But now, as was discussed extensively in that viral Matt Schumer essay that I'm guessing you read and maybe have even
Yes, that's
talked
the one
about.
I was talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he makes the point, and I was at breakfast the other day with someone who works in AI who was amplifying and echoing that point, that AI can now code, right? The
Right.
AI has outpaced its creators, so all those skills that its creators used to get AI to this point, AI is now replicating and besting, and so you can't tell them, well, go into computer science. I teach in the School of Public Policy. This is not the moment in time when you say go into public policy because we don't know what the culture of Washington is going to be like, but the current culture of Washington is anti-public policy, right? I mean, because there is no other answer, I don't think it's a cop-out to say, wow, we all behold how the world is going to change. Just be damned smart and be willing to move on a dime when you see these things open up. Understand that life is not, especially at this point, about some utterly strategic script. It's about serendipity, and it's about being open enough to things happening in a way you don't suspect, and to opportunities that you did not plan for that but just suddenly appear before you. Be open enough to acting on that sort of stuff that you have got a sort of armor against the inability to really extrapolate into the future in a coherent and trustworthy way.
I mean, I guess, expect that things are going to be unstable and learning to live with that instability and uncertainty is probably a really important skill in and of itself, right, Frank? Well, let me ask you, you talk about Washington. There are a couple things happening. I mean, come on. There. Okay, I wanted to ask you first about Les Wexner. He is the billionaire retail executive. He helped Jeffrey Epstein build his fortune. And today he testified behind closed doors before the House Oversight Committee. I'm sure, Frank, you have been watching all the stuff in the Epstein files, and I wonder if you believe there will be real accountability. Donald Trump, who's mentioned more times apparently than God is mentioned in the Bible, wants people to move on. I guess the question is, I think about these survivors and I wonder if that if they'll ever get justice and if these people will in fact be investigated.
I don't know. I mean, when you say will there ever be accountability, what would constitute sufficient accountability? I mean, we are seeing people answer for some of the things they did. We're seeing some people answer for some of the things they did. We're seeing, before our eyes, careers derailed or ruined. Maybe not forever, but probably for enough time to be very hurtful. I mean, those victims will never get everything they deserve because what they deserve is for that never to have happened to them.
Right.
Um, and I don't know where this ends. I mean, I'm surprised it has stayed in the foreground of public attention to the extent it has, because we live, as you know better than I, you've been in this business, you're in this, we live in a very short attention span world. I think one of the reasons it has stayed um, smack in the middle of people's radars for so long is because it does speak to this understanding we have, that there's a world out there of back rooms and secret deals and people protecting one another, and people behaving in extraordinarily unacceptable ways, that too often doesn't come to light. So if you want to look at the positive, and I do try to look at the positive in this day of so little positive, um, people are um, having their behavior, their entitlement. I don't really quite know what the right words are, but they're having it exposed in a manner that I believe to be important. Um, and that is never, it's not full accountability, and it certainly isn't full justice for the victims, but it's better than the alternative, which is for this to all stay hidden for a long time. I don't think we're ever going to get all of the files, or I think by the time they all come out, people will have moved on to other things. Um, but we're getting something. We're getting something, and I think that's important.
One the some of the survivors were front and center at the recent House Judiciary Committee during Pam Bondi's testimony, and I know you wrote about this, and you wrote she didn't merely this is why Frank's such a great writer, you guys. She didn't merely ooze contempt. She gushed it so that all she communicated during more than 4 hours of nasty exchanges was how loathsome she found her interrogators, which was obviously her goal, her mission. I can't get it out of my mind. But then I never stopped thinking about her identical performance before a Senate panel last October. Both crystallized what is arguably the defining trait of the second Trump administration, a bearing and a bullying that casts a noxious haze over all public discourse, which was already plenty polluted. I looked up contempt after I read that. Not that I didn't know what contempt means, but sometimes I like more specific definitions of words. And it's the feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving scorn. There is some irony to this, because many Trump supporters felt initially contempt by elites, by people who they felt did not understand their struggles, their pain, their inability to access the American dream. And yet now contempt has been weaponized by the Trump administration. Talk about that shift and how interesting that is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fascinating, and I do mention it at one point in that column how some people, if they're telling the story of the MAGA movement, if they're giving you a kind of origin theory or whatever, they mention Barack Obama saying way back in the day that there are all these Americans who are clinging to their guns or religion. Remember what a big deal that became. It became a big.
Or Hillary Clinton and
Well, that's the
the
other thing, that
deplorable.
basket of deplorables, right? People cite those statements, which, by the way, were not are not those statements are a problem. They shouldn't have been made that way, and people are right to note them and to take issue with them. They cite those statements as a perfect example of liberal elitism, of the way in which the Democratic elite really saw Americans who lived between the coasts, who hadn't been to college, who were rural, et cetera. And they said it was a feeling that you were the object of contempt for those people that gave a lot of fuel to the MAGA movement. And I think there's enormous truth to that. But as that movement succeeded, it didn't say, okay, we are not going to practice that same sort of contempt. It became, we're now the ones in charge, and we find you even more contemptible than you ever found us. And what you saw in that Bondi hearing, what you see and you hear when so many Trump officials step out onto the public stage or take the microphone or whatever, what you hear is just this blasting of contempt at anybody who doesn't agree with him. Um, and
Well,
it's
certainly by Trump himself, too.
Yeah, and it's strategic because
The contemptor in chief or whatever.
but it's strategic because if you just kind of send the signal, if you just make the case, although it's not really a case, that your opponents are contemptuous, right, or contemptible, if they are such horrible people, they're deserving only of contempt. One must keep them barred from any kind of power, et cetera. You never actually have to engage the substance of the matter. Pam Bondi Pam Bondi's appearance before that House panel is a perfect example. She walked into that room, quite frankly, a joke and a disgrace. What had happened in the days and weeks before she walked into that room, into the House Judiciary Committee, which looks into these sorts of things, she had had she had had a grand jury refused to indict the 6 Democratic lawmakers that her Justice Department was ridiculously trying to prosecute for simply saying, if you are in the armed services and you get an illegal order, you needn't obey it, right? Um, there's nothing treasonous about that statement. It's a statement of fact. And it's well within the kind of bounds of what people on different sides of the aisle say at a given moment in time about unfolding events. As we know from the cliche, grand juries will indict a ham sandwich. Well, they didn't indict these 6 Democratic lawmakers. So are they an omelet? Are they a turkey and cheese? They couldn't even indict these lawmakers. Pam Bondi had seen the Justice Department's attempted prosecutions of James Comey and Letitia James collapse, right? The same may happen to the Jerome Powell attempt. And then there was the mishandling of the Jeffrey Epstein files, right? She couldn't let them ask questions about all that stuff because all that stuff was a source of grave humiliation. So she simply screamed at them, essentially. It wasn't a scream, but it was the equivalent thereof. She simply said, "You're all awful, you're awful, you're awful." If you make it ugly, if you make it about who's more awful, you do not have to deal with the substance of the matter. And the Trump administration does that in circumstance after circumstance. Minneapolis, another prime example. When Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller come out and they brand Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists, they now do not have to talk about what happened and about their own failures and the administration's failures, because they've basically said these 2 people who are dead are so contemptible, there is no point in talking about how they ended up losing their lives and whether we did anything wrong. That doesn't matter because it's all about how contemptible they are.
And it was clear we talked about this last week, Frank, that she was performing before an audience of one, talking about the stock market, which was just so strange. Like, what does that have to do with the price of anything? And it doesn't seem, as long as she has Donald Trump's support, does it even matter that all these things are happening, that she is an abject failure as Attorney General?
It may not matter to her paycheck next week and next month. I think it is going to matter in November. We can have a whole separate conversation about whether the midterm elections are going to be whether they're going to happen in a way that is trustworthy and all that sort of stuff. But I do think she may be safe employment-wise because she has an audience of one in Donald Trump. But she's doing great damage to the administration. She's doing great damage to Republicans' prospects in November. And so this stuff matters a lot. In fact, it's been fascinating. I just mentioned Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem, who were the ones who were quickest and ugliest, most unforgivably, to condemn and try to demonize the citizens killed by federal agents in Minneapolis. It's been a great deal of fun to watch one of the few Republican lawmakers on the Hill who's not worried about being reelected, who's decided not to run in November. Senator Tom Tillis from my state of North Carolina, he has been unrestrained and withering about Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller. And what he says, and he says this often, he directs the comments to the president, is Republicans are going to pay a very, very heavy price in November if you keep these 2 hate mongers, Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem, and he calls them incompetent. All the time. And he uses the word all the time. He's saying, you let this incompetence go unchecked, Republicans will face a reckoning. That's a Republican senator saying that. And so there will be consequences of a sort for Kristi Noem.
That's a Republican not running for reelection. And I always anticipated, Frank, that Republicans, that their self-interest would at some point outweigh their loyalty to Donald Trump, that they would see that they were going to pay in a high price in the midterms, and suddenly they might, be more outspoken. They might criticize the president. And yet we really haven't seen that. Very small examples of it, like Rand Paul having those ICE hearings. But even then, he compared, when I interviewed him, this sort of what is it called, unitary executive power grab, right? He said that Joe Biden did the same thing, which I just, that the false equivalencies that he conjured up during the course of that interview were really, really frustrating. And as someone said, finally, Tilla's stepping up now, but nothing, stepping up, but nothing to lose now. So are you as frustrated and surprised as so many people are that Republicans have been so silent and so resistant? And I think you even wrote a piece in one of your pieces, Frank, that it's easier to criticize like the Christie Gnomes. It's easier to criticize Pam Bondi and even Stephen Miller, but they still refuse to call out this president.
They're terrified of him, and you're right. They criticize Christie and Stephen Miller, et cetera, as a way of not criticizing the president, and they even take it a ludicrous step further, where if they have to kind of take issue with an administration policy, they say, or with something Donald Trump did, they say he got bad advice. It's not his fault. It's the fault of his advisors, right? As if he didn't pick those advisors, as if we don't have the agency, as if the president doesn't have the agency to accept certain advice and reject other advice. I've been shocked at the subservience, at the I can never pronounce this word, sycophancy.
Sycophantishness.
Yeah, that's easier to pronounce. I have been shocked, but I think we're seeing some cracks, and I think we're seeing some cracks because of the nearness, the increasing nearness of the midterms. We talked about Tillis. We talked about the fact that he's not running, so it's not exactly a profile in courage. But I recently did an event here in North Carolina with Mitt Romney, and we talked a lot in the green room beforehand about what he went through in public, what his family went through because he voted twice after the two impeachments to convict Donald Trump. And he turned out not to be running for office again either. But he would go into restaurants and he would be screamed at anywhere in public. He got death threats. He felt so nervous for his and his family's physical safety for the first time in public life. He actually spent a lot of money to hire private security. Tom Tillis, Senator Tillis, is not running for reelection. But I guarantee you, as a result of how outspoken he has been about the federal government's sins in Minneapolis, about Christine Nome, about Stephen Miller, I guarantee you he is having many, many uncomfortable, difficult, scary public moments. And he's doing it anyway. And that's what I mean by these cracks beginning. I think he's doing it because he's trying to show other Republicans the way. There have been a couple of votes recently on Capitol Hill where you've seen some Republicans break ranks. Yes, the numbers have been much smaller than they should be. If you kind of just look at the justice of the matter, and if you look at how much they should be protesting things the Trump administration is doing, things that have nothing to do with traditional Republican politics or conservatism. But I think you are seeing a movement, and I think you'll see more of it between now and November, because they never did lose their self-interest. They just have judged their self-interest to lie with being loyal to Trump. The price of disloyalty outweighed all else. I think if they become convinced that the price of loyalty is too steep, they've never stopped being self-interested. Their self-interest will guide them away from Trump as surely as it put them under his palm.
Lefty Prof, one of our followers, says sycophancy. Sycophancy.
I know how to say sycophant. I got that right. But once you,
yeah. Anyway, thank you for for that. I want to just spend the last couple of minutes, Frank, and Richard Haass is next. We're going to be talking about Iran and what the hell is happening there. But I do want to kind of dig into the midterms because, every time I read like it's going to be a rout, right? This happens with the party in power. Then I see that, the New York Times puts out a piece about how much money GOP candidates have raised, or that fewer GOP, I'll see a headline on CNN, fewer GOP seats are up for grabs this go round. And I think, ugh, what is what is going to happen here? Can you kind of give us your sense? I know it's a ways away, but how you see it shaping up, or is it just too hard to say this far in advance?
No, we can talk about some dynamics that we need to keep an eye on. If you look at the normal pendulum swing, if you look at President Trump's approval ratings, there would be every reason at a normal time to expect a great performance for Democrats, certainly in House elections. The Senate map is so not good for Democrats that there certainly won't be any rout in the Senate. And it's still going to be a little bit of a surprise, even given shifting public sentiment and the usual midterm pendulum swing. It would still be surprising if Democrats take the Senate. They should take the House, but there's the money question, which you just flagged. There's the question of how many efforts will there be to suppress the vote, to intimidate people not to go to the polls. We saw it in his rejection of election results in 2020. We have seen that Donald Trump and his allies, or maybe I should say his minions, they will go places, they will do things that people didn't do before. They don't have, you've been using the word guardrails, they don't have the sorts of guardrails that existed in politics before. So I don't know how free and unencumbered are Americans going to feel about going to the polls. What
And
will
we've got
happen?
this SAVE Act lurking, right? Passed by the House. John Thune said it is going to go before the Senate, which is require documentary proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. And a lot of people don't have passports. John and I had this big conversation about this the other night about voter IDs. And people I think, gosh, why shouldn't they have IDs? But I don't think people realize how onerous it is for many Americans, right?
It is, and like like do they have to have the exact type of ID that's being required in a given state, et cetera? Um, and again, it's important to say the context for this is we do not have proof of widespread fraudulent voting. So it's easy to kind of say, like, well, what's wrong with asking someone to have an ID? Well, there's an ID, then there's asking them to have a particular type of ID, and then
Or they're
there's the
having
question of
a birth certificate match their ID and they've gotten married and changed
right.
their name.
Right. And then there's the question, like, why are we coming up with solutions for what aren't problems? What is the epidemic of illegal voting that you are supposedly needing to do these things to address? Like, and isn't the point of a democracy to involve as many people as possible and to try to get a result that is as consistent with the popular will as can be figured out. But that's not the way this is unfolding. And then there's another question for Democrats. I think it's really, really important. Um, are you in it to win it? If you believe that the stakes of these midterms are as high as you say you believe they are, and I think the stakes are alpine, I really do, um, you need to stop demanding perfection of candidates. You need to think very clearly, very seriously in those House districts that are purplish and where there is a swing seat, and there are fewer and fewer of these districts, but they're the ones that decide the election. When it comes to the primary, are you going to vote for the candidate who checks every single one of your purity boxes? Or are you going to vote for the candidate who has a better chance of winning in the general? If you believe that the only issue really is making sure that Donald Trump doesn't spend 2 unencumbered years toward the end of his term, then you have to vote with a brutally practical mindset. And we're going to find out whether Democrats have reached that point and can be brutally practical.
That's a really good point that Barack Obama made about virtue signaling and about purity tests. And Democrats, it seems to me, do often seem to eat their young, and they, are so focused on adhering to they're so doctrinaire sometimes. And I think you're right that people have to be practical. My last question, I hope you'll come back, by the way, Frank, because I love talking to you. But I you said that this might be a time for a quote, poetic and charismatic centrist. We're talking about the presidential race now. Um, I- I'm curious why you believe that. I talk to a lot of young people. Now, granted, they live in Brooklyn and they're big Mom Donnie supporters, but they could not disagree with you more. that now is the time for a radical change in how we approach government and which candidates we want to represent, our positions in terms of healthcare, for example, in terms of all kinds of issues. So this idea of a centrist, I'd love you to defend that position before we say goodbye.
Yeah, the defense is simple. We're all in a casino. We're all placing bets, and they are bets, and so we really don't know. But if you if you look at in 2024, for example, if you look at the senators and House members, the Democratic senators and House members who won in districts that Trump also won, to a person, they are moderate. They are, if not centrist, they're in that direction. Um, I'm advocating something that is about ending the Trump era and blunting forever the most dangerous edges of the MAGA movement, right? Not the whole movement. There are good people in that movement, but blunting the most dangerous edges of it. I think they're still talking about what this country fundamentally needs to get to social justice, to take better care of its neediest members. I want to get there too, but I'm talking about the interim, and I'm talking about making sure, I'm talking about a prophylactic against the worst possible outcome. And I think if you look at the numbers, if you are placing the safest bet in this casino that we're all in, I think you go in the immediate future for the more moderate candidates, because in those places, in those districts, in those states that decide elections, it's those Democrats who have, over the past decade, tended to do much, much better. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's interesting because I'll make sure my daughter listens to this conversation. But someone said we need Bashir types. I totally agree. Andy Bashir, of course, is the governor of Kentucky, a ruby red state and a blue governor. Frank, I hope you'll come back and have a conversation with me again. I just love seeing you. I love talking to you. I love hearing your insight, and you got a lot of fans watching. So hopefully we'll see each other at some point in the near future. I miss you.
I hope so. I missed you too, and I was delighted that you invited me on. It's great to spend time with you.
Okay, thanks, Frank. All right, now we're going to the international stage, and we're going to be talking to Richard Haass because there's a lot of pretty scary shit, you guys, going on internationally. Excuse my French. And Richard is the man to talk to about this. So let's get him on the horn. I was pretty worried when I opened up my Axios newsletter this morning because they basically said, "Hi, Richard.
Hey, Katie, how are you?
Oh, I've got to remove Frank. Sorry about that. How do
Yeah.
I remove Frank, you guys? Good Lord. You would
Good
think I
Lord.
knew how to do this now. Hold on, Richard.
It's okay.
Frank, okay. How do I remove Frank, you guys? Shoot. Okay, Richard, can you come? You look like you're in a fog.
I know. I don't know what's going on. It says new beauty
Okay, there you
filter
are.
and
That's good.
it says beauty filter and music mode. What is that?
Do you have your beauty filter on again, Richard?
I don't leave home without it.
Can you take that filter off so we can actually see your face?
If I knew how it was on, Katie, I've never. How do you get rid of it?
I don't know.
Cancel.
I'm not the most technical person
Oh
in the room.
man, I am the least technical person. It says touch up appearance. Don't want to do that. Music mode. I don't want that. I guess. Does that help? No.
Mm-mm. Do you have anyone like under 30 in the area?
I could. Yeah, I've got one or two. Should I ask?
Yeah, ask them. And we
Okay.
can talk and then, yeah, go ask them.
Okay,
Go ahead and
let me
ask
go
them.
ask,
So, hi everyone. I'll just kill some time. If you guys have some questions for Richard, this is what I read in Axios this morning, and I was like, "Holy shit!" The Trump administration is closer to war than most Americans realize. It could begin very soon. It goes on to
you see this
say
thing? It's like, it's
a U.S.
the
military
beauty mode or
operation in
something
Iran would
elsewhere on
likely
there?
be a massive weeks-long campaign that would look more like a full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela.
Maybe click.
Oh, someone said just wipe off your camera, Richard. Would that maybe help? Maybe you just have a film on your camera. You have a tissue or something? See, Adriana or Courtney or whoever is here, I think it's more than that. I don't think his camera is just dirty. But you know what, Richard? I think we'll just deal with it. Everyone, I mean, what are we going to do, right? So let's just talk. I was just reading, Richard, this Axios newsletter this morning that basically says the Trump administration is closer to war. Um, can you have him leave and come back? Do you want me to do that, Adriana? Okay, Richard, I'm gonna have you leave and come back. Let's try that. Okay. I'll be right back. Is that what I'm doing? Oh, good Lord. I don't, okay. Hi. Well, yes, please. No, no, just stay. Now, what are you saying? Adriana, I can't understand these notes you're writing me. Okay. I'm staying, and now I'm going to put Richard on again, right? Thank you. Gosh, hold on, everybody. Sorry about this. We've actually been pretty good technically for a while. Let's see if Richard can take out the filter and we can see him more. If not,
It's still like I'm behind the screen. I don't know what it is, Katie.
yeah, don't worry about it. Just lower your headroom a little bit and we'll just deal with it. Don't worry.
I'm sorry. This is a first for us. And,
I
just
know.
just
But
when we
what
thought we were too old to have firsts.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's great to hear you and to have you here, Richard, because, actually we have some pretty darn serious things to talk about, as I've said a couple of times while we were kind of ironing out these issues or not. That the Axios report this morning, the Trump administration is closer to war than most Americans realize. It could begin very soon. I read that this morning and I was like, holy cow, what is going on with Iran? It feels like people aren't paying attention. They're preoccupied with other things. Can you really just get us up to speed on this?
Yeah, so here we are. It's the middle of February. It's been about, what, 6, 7 weeks since the protests broke out in Iran, late December, against the backdrop of a collapsing economy. The regime reacted with extraordinary brutality. It's hard to get whether it was 10,000 people killed or more. I don't know if
Some people say 30,000 at least, Richard. Who knows?
possible. And there's been just horrific stories about going into hospitals and killing people who are getting medical treatment, including the people giving the medical treatment. It's been awful, however you measure it. The United States didn't help when the president went out and encouraged people to come out and basically said, "We have your back." And it turned out we didn't. It was reminded me a little bit of Hungary in 1956, reminded me a little bit of Barack Obama setting a red line. The Syrians crossed it and we did nothing. It was terrible. And ever since then, what happened is the United States started amassing or assembling what the president likes to call an armada, essentially a large number of highly capable ships, aircraft, you name it. And we've had now, 2 rounds of negotiations between the United States and Iran, the foreign minister of Iran, Messrs. Witkoff and Kushner from the United States. The Iranians seem to want to have a very narrow nuclear-related talk and a very limited agreement, temporary one, and so forth. Just as a 10-second aside, it's ironic since the United States claimed we had obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons, seems maybe not. And the United States clearly wants a broader conversation. It could include not just the nuclear file, but ballistic missiles, Iranian support for various proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, what have you, and also obviously questions of domestic treatment of the opposition, some would say regime change. The Israelis, who are also a party to this, seem most interested in going after the Iranian ballistic missile program. Iran still has thousands of ballistic missiles that, even with conventional warheads on them, could cause significant harm. So that's where we are. We've amassed an enormous military force. It can't just sit there forever. We've not articulated objectives, Katie, so I find this rather head-scratching. Before you go to war, you always ought to think about what's your definition of success. Are we trying to set up a negotiation? Are we trying to destroy what nuclear items we didn't get a few months ago? Are we trying to destroy missiles? Are we trying to promote regime change? Well, then, is military force the right way to do those things? How might Iran retaliate? Already we see the Iranians threatening shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. They could attack the Saudis or others. They could attack Israel. They could attack U.S. forces throughout the region in places like Syria and Iraq. So I'll be honest with you, we have brought things to something of a head, and I wouldn't be shocked if something did happen this weekend. Uh, the vice president yesterday talked about 2 weeks, but that could just be a distraction. We could go to war, we could wake up tomorrow. But what I do not understand is, what are we hoping to achieve? What's our definition of success here? And are we prepared for various types of Iranian responses? And short of, well, again, are we interested in things like regime change? Why do we think we can bring it about? What do we think would take the place of this regime? So I could go on for a long time, but I won't. But I got a lot more questions than answers.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, what do you think the rationale is? Is it about the nuclear weapons program? Is it about regime change? And doesn't there have to be buy-in? Uh, I mean, I know the War Powers Act is kind of not really utilized on a
Yep.
regular basis, but it seems like this is kind of happening in a vacuum. Is that accurate?
Well, again, it's not quite clear what's triggered this. I mean, the one thing the Iranians have done differently over the last 6, 7 weeks is massacre their own people. From what I can tell, they haven't done anything different in any of the other areas with nuclear, with missiles, with proxies, with what have you. So then you'd have to ask yourself, if that's the cause here, if that's leading to what we're doing, is the use of military force the way to go? We can't defend individual Iranians. And are you sure that using military force against military or other targets in Iran will get rid of the regime and bring into power something better? We're not going to occupy Iran. People who don't know Iran, one, it's a large country. Two, there's over 90 million people there. 90 million. So this is not Venezuela. We're not just going to do an easy little leadership change. It's not Panama. So again, I just don't understand. I'd say one other thing. If our goal was regime change, Katie, I would have left all the military forces at home. What's the Achilles heel of Iran? It's the economy. So I would say, if we want to put pressure on Iran, let's play the long game. Let's tell the Iranian people, stay at home, don't get yourselves killed. Let's turn up the heat on the Iranian economy. And let's ultimately try to make things so bad. And by the way, they've done a pretty good job themselves of making it bad. They don't need a lot of help from us, but we can help with sanctions. Let's try to then promote defections. You'll know that things are beginning to change in Iran when we see political leaders and military leaders and various groups of guys with arms begin to go over to the opposition. We're beginning to see some signs of a crack at the political level. And you've seen certain people be arrested recently. What we've not seen are security forces going over. And ironically enough, that's what happened in 1979 when the Shah was overthrown. It took defections of the security forces who were guarding the Shah, who went over to the Ayatollah. Well, now we want them to go in the opposite direction, away from the clerics, away from the Revolutionary Guards, over to the people. And that hasn't happened yet. And I would say, let's turn up the economic heat. So I think we're making a fundamental mistake negotiating with Iran and turning this into a military confrontation at this point. I would use our military coercion, if you will, and play for a little bit of time.
But what I was going to ask you about the timing is, can you see this as a wag the dog scenario in any way, Richard?
I'm never comfortable making those kinds of charges. Also, that would be unwise in the sense that, it's always easier to start these things than it is to see them through. There's no way, even if somebody wanted a distraction, Katie, there's distractions and there's distractions. There's no way anybody could walk into the Oval Office, or I guess to Mar-a-Lago, these days and say, "Mr. President, if you do this, it will result in this type of outcome, and that will change the conversation." I can imagine things going badly, and that could change the conversation, but not in the way that Donald Trump wants. So anyone who thinks that you can, what's the word, manipulate this to serve domestic political ends, I think is kidding himself or herself. It's really dangerous to work that way. It's war. What was it? It was the Mike Tyson line that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face in a prize fight. It's a little bit like that with war. You can have whatever set of goals you want, and you can say we want to kick off distractions, but there's zero chance you can know with any confidence how something's going to play out.
I want to ask you a little bit about Ukraine, because Witkoff and Kushner are also talking about the war in Ukraine and Russia and what they're going to do. And it's, I guess that these have been ongoing talks. The negotiations are the third round of U.S. brokered talks in just a few weeks, but very little progress seems to be made. Is being made vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine, right, Richard? I mean, and Putin thinks time is on his side, right? The longer it takes, the better things will be for him.
A couple of things. One is you're right, very little progress is being made. And that might be just as well, given the structure of the US proposals. What we are doing is rewarding aggression. We are putting much more pressure on Ukraine than on Russia. I'm writing about it this week in Home and Away, Katie. I just feel, because what we're coming up against, and within 10 days, is the end of the fourth year of this phase of the war. We're about to start the fifth year next week of the fifth year of the war. And I don't fault the president for wanting to end the war. I mean, there's probably been close to 2 million military and civilian casualties on the two sides. This is beyond anybody's ability to imagine. This has been horrific. It's just horrific. But you don't want to end the war in a way that rewards aggression or simply sets up renewed warfare after a pause. So, I think to the president, this president gets points for wanting to promote peace. He also gets some points for trying to tell the Ukrainians, look, you've got to have realistic goals. Liberating Crimea by military force is not one of them. But he's dead wrong in not supporting Ukraine directly militarily. He's dead wrong by wanting to give Russia territory in the east to reward aggression. I wouldn't put a lot of faith in American security guarantees. I mean, this is a president who, changes his mind or his mood, shall we say, with great frequency. Why would Ukraine want to put its security in our hands rather than in its own? So my guess is they're going to resist. And Russia believes that, as you say correctly, they believe time's on their side, in part because we haven't put the screws on them economically, in part because we haven't done more for Ukraine. If you look at that original 28-point plan on Ukraine that was issued a few months ago, it was shocking how much of it was about rehabilitating Russia and opening up a new era of US-Russia commercial relations, as though that's the big prize here, which is preposterous. So I think, again, I understand the desire to want peace, but how we're going about it, I think, is truly unfortunate.
I want to spend the rest of our time today talking about the Munich Security Conference, Richard, because that got a lot of attention. Last year, J.D. Vance delivered a speech that many Europeans found jarring, even hostile. This year, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, right? Marco
And
Rubio.
also, I think he's also the acting chief archivist, but I may be wrong on that.
He struck a less combative tone and received a standing ovation. I've seen a lot of different analyses of this speech, and I'd love to hear your take.
Look, the speech was impressive, and just as a slight aside, Marco Rubio showed real political chops in that speech, and I would think it was a message potentially about 2028. I mean, both the substance of the speech, the delivery, it was impressive. But there's a big but. And yes, there was a positive reaction to it in the hall, as you correctly say, in part because it wasn't J.D. Vance. It wasn't an in-your-face, antagonistic, tirade against the Europeans. So there was almost, I think it was more relief than anything else. And there was some nice lines in it about Europe and about the closeness of Americans and Europeans. But there's a lot of big buts.
Yeah, and that has a dark side too, doesn't it, Richard?
Yeah, there was the dark side, all the talk about Western civilization and Christian civilization as opposed to democracy and human rights. Massive criticisms of Europe over their interest in climate change, about some of the openness to immigration. There was no talk or mention of Ukraine in the speech that came up in the Q&A afterwards. No defense or discussion of tariffs, where Europeans have been targeted. Did nothing to ameliorate the whole Greenland debacle of several weeks before. And I came away listening to it, Katie, at the end saying it was a good speech. The biggest problem is that it wasn't clear to me Marco Rubio was speaking for the administration, that there was too big of a gap between important elements of this administration's foreign policy. I just mentioned a few: Ukraine, Greenland, tariffs, and the like, and what he was saying. So it was a reasonable, professionally delivered speech. But I don't know any European afterwards who would say, wow, I feel much more comfortable about the future of NATO. I feel much more confident that Americans are going to honor their Article 5 commitments and come to our defense if suddenly Russia begins to go across this or that border. So at the end of the day, I don't think it changed much of anything. No, it's really interesting, by the way. I should have mentioned it. Every year at the Munich Security Conference, they issue a report before things.
Mhm.
And the report they issued this year, the title of it, Under Destruction. And it was all about the state of NATO and the transatlantic relationship. I'll read you one or two lines. The world has entered a period of wrecking ball politics. More than 80 years after construction began, the US-led post-1945 international order is now under destruction. And then one more line, Katie. No, the most powerful of those who take the axe to existing rules and institutions is US President Donald Trump. That's pretty in your face. And I think that's where, particularly after Davos and Greenland and the tariffs and you name it, and just the serial disillusionment about Ukraine. What you've had, the good side is the Europeans are beginning to get more serious about their own security. The
Mhm.
bad side, that's why we got a major rift in the transatlantic relationship.
So I'm confused because you say Marco Rubio gave a good speech. It was well received. And yet, are you saying it was sort of too little too late or not enough to undo the damage that Trump has already done?
Largely, I think it was well received in the hall because it wasn't J.D. Vance 2.0. So I think there was a bit of sigh and relief. But the more people listened to it carefully and read it and reread it, there was less and less relief because there was language in it that gave people agita, and they noticed the disconnect between large parts of the speech and large parts of Trumpian foreign policy. Then Marco Rubio didn't have the time or chose not to attend the multilateral meeting with NATO on Ukraine, but he did have the time to jet over to Hungary and meet with Viktor Orban. The
Yeah,
wor
yeah. Before we talk about the Orban meeting, I do want to just go back to one thing that we discussed briefly, Richard, was this sort of Christian national white view of what binds the US and Europe together. And that will actually give us some good segue to Orban. But but were you taken aback? But I know that the New York Times said one senior European official described his speech as a poison pill with his implicit suggestion that the US and its Western allies were fighting to preserve a whiter, more Christian Europe. And I just want you to unpack that for a moment. I mean, obviously, this has to do with anti-immigration sentiment that's been spreading all over Europe. But was that scary to you?
well, it's certainly worrisome, and it's another sign about how our American political culture and European political culture are diverging. Look, we use that language here quite a lot. I don't like it when I hear it here because this was a nation that you had both freedom of religion, but also freedom from religion. Here we are in our 250th year, and this is, we're a predominantly Christian nation, if you will, demographically, but we're not a Christian nation. This was a nation founded on ideas. And again, freedom of religion was an important one, but also freedom from religion. That we don't have a state religion. That's one of the things that differentiated the United States from the country we declared independence from. So when I see this, it obviously sends all sorts of signals. It's anti-Muslim. Jews feel there's an anti-Semitic dimension to this. There's a racist aspect because of the way certain people fuse white America and Christian America. But there's also it's just this is not what this country was founded on. We were founded on ideas and equal opportunity and and freedom from certain things. So the Europeans hear this, and it makes them wildly uneasy. I also think that we tend to talk about religion much more in the public place than do Europeans. So this kind of language, particularly in the absence of language about democracy and human rights, they thought that was the common thread. They thought that was the fabric of the West. And what they're now hearing is something else being substituted for the democracy, human rights, rule of law fabric of the West, and that makes them wildly uneasy.
Having said that, that language, that ideology, those words do have a receptive audience in much of Europe.
Well, I would say much of it they do in Russia. They do
Well, I mean, you talk about, right?
Hungary.
I mean, Italy, you talk about all these countries, Viktor Orban, et cetera, and how this sort of ideology is taking hold throughout Europe, right, Richard?
No, I hear that. Look, what you're seeing in Europe, fair enough, it's a good point, is like here. We're seeing increasingly a right emerge. I think, Katie, yeah, it's good you're sitting down. I think after the events of the last few weeks, I can imagine Mr. Farage at one point being Prime Minister of Britain as the Labour Party and the Conservative Party essentially destroy themselves in Britain. I can imagine a far right government in France down the road and so forth. So yeah, we're seeing elements of a far right, some of its religions, some not. Sometimes it uses religion to increases its political appeal. But yeah, I think what we're seeing in Europe is some replication of what we're seeing here, and might be a warning sign, Katie. It's a different and larger conversation, but in this era of political polarization, uh, of sustained joblessness, of enhanced or increased inequality, it is not
The
impossible.
advent of AI.
That's what I meant. The joblessness because of AI.
Right.
Um, I actually think this could be very much in our collective futures. And that used the word scary. That would be scary because that would pose a real threat to all sorts of things, but the rule of law, to democracy, and so forth. And you'll see it'll happen here. It'll happen in Europe. Indeed, Europe is very vulnerable, even though it's not nearly as far along on AI because of the lack of economic growth. Europe is going to face some rough economic times.
And let's end by talking about this visit with Viktor Orban and what that telegraphed to the rest of the world, which I think is actually built on what you just said.
Yeah, Viktor Orban represents a very different model of a European polity. And, in a word, I think it's illiberal. It has some of the appearance and structures of democracy, but in many ways it's undemocratic. It's the balance between the state role and the society is tilted heavily in favor of the state. Same holds in the economy. It's the degree of executive primacy as opposed to a large legislative role. The strength of civil society is much weakened. And what's frightening about what I've just said is we're seeing elements of that here. Let's be blunt. What we have is a degree of executive primacy that James Madison and Federalist 51 did not imagine. He was worried about. We're seeing the state, the government more involved in the economy. We're seeing the weaponization of the Justice Department. We're seeing pressure on your world, the world of media. So what worries me, and one of the reasons I worry also that so much of the right in this country sees Orban as a kind of hero, the Tucker Carlsons and others. Well, I take that seriously. I actually think that they see him as something of a model for this country. And if that doesn't make you uneasy, I don't know what will. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. Don't get me wrong. But this is not a conversation the two of us would have been having 5 or 10 years ago. And now it's what you were just talking previously with Frank. You didn't get into it, about questions about the midterms and free and fair voting and so forth. We're now having conversations. We need to have conversations that we never imagined, much less held before. And the range or the spectrum of imaginable political outcomes and futures has grown. I would say unfortunately, but it's grown, and that ought to be a warning that, all the things we assumed would either happen, all the things we assumed could never happen. Well, it's a good time to check your assumptions at the door, and I don't mean to end things on a gloomy
No,
note.
I think you're totally right, Richard, and to stay vigilant and engaged and active. And I guess that means mostly support candidates and vote.
It means that, but also means supporting a context where people, yes, come out and vote and all that, but also where people who are election workers are well trained and lawyers are involved, and that we push back against the use of ICE or the military in a monitoring situation, and that we basically prepare for the idea that this might not be elections like we used to recall, that there could be challenges to either to access to voting or to the tabulation of votes that we haven't seen. And yes, I take that possibility seriously. Hope I'm wrong. I hope, by the way, in a year you say, "Boy, Richard, you were a Cassandra. You were dead wrong." And I'd love to be wrong. And good news is I'm wrong. You know, more than my fair share. But I take it seriously. I take these possibilities seriously. I certainly don't dismiss them.
Well, I don't think you're wrong. I wish I thought you were wrong.
You think I'm wrong
And
about so much, actually, so I'm
no,
surprised.
that's not true. And I hope I will be able to say you're wrong, but I'm afraid I worry that I won't be able to say that. Anyway, nice talking to you, Richard, on that happy note. Um,
Thank you,
get your
Katie.
camera
I will
fixed.
get my camera fixed. Put in one plug for my Substack while you're here.
Okay, Richard has a great Substack called Home and Away, where he really helps everyone understand sort of these big, thorny global issues. I highly recommend it and him. Please follow him on Substack. And Richard, good to see you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Or in this case, Katie, good not to see me.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You're looking very good,
It's there's so many things I could say, but I've learned not to say everything that comes into my head.
Okay, good, because something tells me an insult was coming my way. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Bye,
Bye.
Richard.
Take care.
Okay, now we're going to, Richard knows. Tap the three dots at the left. Okay, I'm doing that, you guys. Richard left, so I think we're okay. Oh, three dots to the right. I don't see the three dots to the left. I'm sorry, you guys. I see music mode and touch up appearance. I think that's what Richard was touching. Okay, we're going to talk about what's happening in Texas because it's super interesting. And Aaron Haynes is from the 19th, is nice enough to join us. I know Errin, she is the editor at large at the 19th. Very smart, lives in Texas. Oh, actually, I don't know if she lives in Texas. She might live in Georgia, but covers a lot of things in Texas. And hopefully, I don't know if Errin does a lot of Substack, but she is also the author of the Amendment newsletter. Hi, Errin.
Katie, how are you? Good to see you.
So good. So good to see you. I was just telling everybody about your editor at large at the 19th, the author of a newsletter called The Amendment. You're president of the National Association of Black Journalists, and also someone I admire a lot, Errin. And I'm so happy you could join us and talk about what's going on in the Lone Star State, because A lot of people are talking about it. But before we broach that topic, I do want to ask you about Jesse Jackson, because you wrote a piece. Jesse Jackson, of course, died yesterday at the age of 84. You wrote a piece called He Gave Me My Wings. Jesse Jackson opened doors for Black women in politics. And I wondered if you could just tell us what Jesse Jackson's legacy has meant to you, Errin, and the lasting impact he's had not only on politics, but really on your life.
Yeah, I mean, well, listen, first of all, thank you so much for that and for lifting up that story. I was glad that we were able to do it and glad that we were able to have it for the 19th because, Jesse Jackson is somebody that I've covered for most of my career. Before I was at the 19th, I was at the Associated Press. I covered race and politics nationally. And so that meant that I talked to Reverend Jackson quite a bit, right? He was somebody who was actually very generous with reporters. I'm pretty sure he had the number to our bureau memorized and would just call and tell us things that he was paying attention to, things he thought that we should be paying attention to. But if we needed to talk to him about civil rights, about voting rights, he was always there. I mean, and this is decades after he is a lieutenant to the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., right? So I am somebody that had been covering him for quite a while and had seen uh, the evolution of his civil rights work as we saw that go from the civil rights movement to politics, his presidential runs. I was a child when that happened, but then the work that he continued to do, even as he got older, still fighting for voting rights in this country. And so, when I woke up yesterday to the news that he had passed away, obviously, so many people were reflecting on his work in the civil rights movement, as we should. I mean, that was absolutely very important work. But my mind really was going to people like Donna Brazile, people like Leah Daughtry, or Mignon Moore, Yolanda Caraway. Like these people are really just powerhouses in Democratic Party politics. And I've interviewed them, and they all, told me very early on that they credit their careers to Reverend Jackson because he is the one that really gave them their start in national presidential party politics at a time when the party was not really seeing, or American politics wasn't really seeing elevating women as like political organizers, political strategists. He is somebody that absolutely made sure that they had a seat at the table, that they were the ones that were always in the room, and that they were part of the decision making. And so by doing that, empowering them in that way, that then these people go on to be trailblazers in Democratic politics, leading campaigns and strategizing, helping people, even helping get presidents elected. So I think that is such a huge part of his legacy. In addition, we talk a lot about the Rainbow Coalition that he built, that electorate that he helped to expand, registering millions of voters, but the types of voters that he was reaching out to, right? We're talking about rural folks. We're talking about poor white folks, as well as Black folks. Women, LGBTQ plus people. He was seeing everybody, and his message was really for everybody. So, like before, we have the kind of hope and change of Barack Obama, who does end up to go on to become the first Black president. We have Jesse Jackson, who is telling people keep hope alive, and that's like a message that was really resonating with a lot of different people across race, across age, across gender, across geography.
I wondered, Aaron, I know he's been in declining health,
Yeah.
and I wondered if you had a chance to talk to him. It's ironic. This is Black History Month, but
Yeah.
we've seen the steady erosion of Black history being told transparently and honestly in schools across the country. We've seen, a judge says the Trump administration has till 5 p.m. Friday to restore displays about slavery
Yeah.
at the president's house site on Philadelphia's Independence Mall. We've seen things happen in national parks. We've seen Arlington National Cemetery basically be erased of the accomplishments made by military members of the military, people of color, and women. And I'm curious if Reverend Jackson talked to you about that in in recent months and about so many examples of turning back the clock on so much progress that had been made.
Yeah, I mean, listen, as you mentioned, Reverend Jackson was in declining health. His ability to speak was diminished as part of his illness. And so, we did not really have a chance to speak much in recent years. I saw him in places, for example, like Selma for the Bloody Sunday commemorations. He would still show up there. He was there at the 2024 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where they brought him out on stage to thunderous applause. Even though he didn't speak, he still very much seemed to appreciate that moment. He seemed to be very present in that moment. And I'm told that he was actually there every single night of that convention. And so I think that covering him for as long as I did, I'm pretty sure that he would be very concerned about the age of erasure and extinction that we now find ourselves in, the rollback of so many of the gains that people like he and Dr. King fought for and worked for, that he continued to work for even after Dr. King was assassinated, for those rights to be under threat for our history. I mean, this is somebody who grew up in, Jim Crow, South Carolina, so for him, he lived a lot of that history. This is not just about uh, a history that many of us learned about. He also lived that history, and so I think that it is so important that we make sure that that record is correct. My puppy is now wanting to be part of this conversation. Um, Hilarious. It's so important for us to make sure that we do continue to talk about um, these stories and also understand. I mean, like we just lost Reverend Jackson yesterday. This history is still so present with us. I live in Atlanta where, Ambassador Andrew Young is still with us. He's in his 90s, right? Like, so this is not um, some bygone era, right? I mean, the history is still living with us, and so I think that is why we still must make sure that we get this right, that we still tell these stories, and I will say, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't say as NABJ president that Black journalists so often are the ones that are telling these stories, making sure that record is correct and keeping them really as part of the American story.
Everyone, I'm talking to my friend Aaron Haynes. I said Hayes earlier. I meant Haynes, Aaron. Sorry about that. Who's editor at large at the 19th and also author of the Amendment newsletter and president of the National Association of Black Journalists. Aaron, just real quickly, before I talk to you about the Texas race, which I think so many people are fascinated, can you just briefly tell everyone what the 19th is and,
Absolutely.
and why you all were established and how people can read your work?
Yes. So in 2020, a group of us launched the 19th. It is a national online publication focused on the intersection of gender, politics, and power. And really, the reason that we exist is because we felt like political journalism was too male and too pale when we know that women are more than half the population, more than half the electorate. And yet, too much of our politics still talks about women as a special interest group, still talks about women's issues as if things like the economy or healthcare or education are not things that all of us should care about. And so, really wanting to tell a more honest and accurate story, frankly, about who and where we are as a country is really why we exist. And I'm so grateful to say that 6 years later, our newsroom is thriving. One, because of the people who feel affirmed by our coverage, who are feeling seen and heard in this democracy, many of them for the first time. But I guess it also is unfortunate that many, one of the reasons that we are succeeding is because many of the folks who feel under attack right now in our politics, women, queer people, people of color, other people who've been historically marginalized in our society, um, those people are really relying on us for coverage, and frankly, those people and their stories and their experiences are really what is driving what is happening in our politics and in our democracy today.
Thank you for that, Erin, and thank you for the great work that you're doing. I wanted to make sure everybody understood the important role that the 19th is serving and
And thank you for
continues
your
to serve.
support of the Katie. You've been a day one person, and we really appreciate you so much for that. And shout out to independent media.
Right on. And you're right. And I'm a big fan of what you all are doing, and I'm so happy you're thriving. That makes me Makes my heart sing. So let's talk about Texas.
Let's get it.
You live in Atlanta, but the 19th is headquartered in Austin, Texas, and you cover a lot of Texas news as well as sort of news all over the country, and that intersection, as you said, with gender politics, power, and race. And let's talk about what's happening. So early voting started yesterday. This race has really captured the imagination because of two very charismatic candidates, Aaron. We've got Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Texas, and she is running against James Talarico, who is the state representative. Talk to me about each of these candidates and why they have captured the public's imagination as they have.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, in years where there are not presidential elections, state elections can become nationalized. And I think that that is the situation that we find ourselves in. All eyes are on Texas because they want to see what is going to happen with this race. Jasmine Crockett was already a national figure. James Talarico, frankly, is somebody who is a rising national figure in Democratic politics in large part because of this race. But, I think. Um, I've covered politics for a long time. I never like to say that necessarily these races are like a bellwether, an indicator of kind of where things are going. I know we've got a midterm election in November, and a lot of people are kind of trying to read the tea leaves to see, what Texas can tell us about the 2026 midterms. But what I would say is that what this race does is that it really captures where Texas Democrats are right now. Right, this is a competitive race, which a lot of people were not sure if it was going to be that. I think we're seeing that it is. It's fluid, right? But it's also about kind of two different theories about how you build power in a very tough statewide environment. It's a real race. It's shifting. Early on, you had James Talarico, who looked like a front runner. He looked like he had a lot of momentum, especially because of the fundraising and kind of his ability to present himself as kind of like this fresh new face statewide. But more recent polling, depending on what polls you're looking at, and I know we can probably get into that, really suggests that Jasmine Crockett may be pulling ahead, and that could be largely due not only to her national footprint, but also because of the base energy that she is tapping into.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because, as I said, two incredibly um, compelling
Yeah.
candidates. I interviewed James Talarico a while ago I think it was on my Substack, and I was really impressed by the way he has used faith to undergird, I think, more progressive policies. And, he's in seminary. He's, as I said, a state representative. He kind of came out of nowhere. I thought, he's a very different kind of candidate.
Mhm.
And I have to say, Aaron, when Jasmine Crockett entered the race, who I think has incredible talent on her side and is very dynamic, part of me was like, shoot, these are two great candidates. Why do they have to run against each other?
Well, somebody has to run and somebody has to lose. I mean, that's how politics works, right? And it doesn't mean, that that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be one really strong person and one really weak person, or that there's going to be like a really
No, but
between the candidates. I mean, it is certainly something for Texas to have an embarrassment of riches in the Democratic Party, right? Like that really is something, and that really does say something about, these two folks really contesting for this primary nomination. And I don't think, I know there certainly has been a lot of chatter about, kind of one canceling out the other. And so why didn't somebody stand down and all of that? But I mean, electability is about who the people want to elect. So we're going to see how it goes. But I think you're right in terms of like their very contrasting styles, offering the voter something very different. Obviously, people who have seen Jasmine Crockett, who are familiar with her, she's got this real reputation as a fighter. She's visible. She's outspoken. She's
fiery.
national. She's speaking directly to the Democratic base, right? And I think there are some Democrats who want that, fighter, especially right now, and see that as a real contrast to what they're seeing in the administration and wanting to see somebody pushing back forcefully against that, right? I think particularly Black voters are responding to that. They're going to be absolutely essential in any kind of Texas Democratic primary. So her message in Texas really seems to be playing small, being polite, that's not the way that we're going to win. And so that, we'll see if that resonates with people. And then, like you said, you've got James Talarico. Democrats, white Democrats in particular, the idea of leaning into faith. We know, at least I know from covering Democratic politics for a long time, that Democrats can be faith voters. The Black church, for example, you've got, Black voters coming out of the church that absolutely tie their faith to what that means for them and how that translates to the ballot box. But really seeing white Democrats leaning into faith, that isn't something that you always see. And so for him to be doing that, talking about policy and his work in the Texas legislature and his ability to kind of appeal beyond the base, that his argument is really more kind of Democrats need somebody who can talk to voters who don't already see themselves reflected maybe in national Democratic politics.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about polls, because I know a Houston Public Radio poll found in a statewide sample of 550 likely voters, Crockett was ahead of Talarico by 8 percentage points. But the Texas Tribune found Talarico leading Crockett 47 to 38%. So it's clearly unclear who's ahead at this point. And early voting has started, as I said, but the election is going to be this coming Tuesday, right?
It's, I believe it's March the 3rd.
Oh, you're right.
Yep.
It's March the 3rd. I apologize, everybody.
No, I'm ready for it too.
It's March the 3rd. Sorry about that. You're right. So I guess anything can happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, this is going to be, I think it is going to be tight. It's absolutely competitive. And, I think what is also important is because it is so tight, potentially, you could have on the other side of this, a divided Democratic Party, right, in Texas. And they're going to need to unite if they want to beat, the Republican here on the other side of this primary election. So, we know that the race is going to be uphill in Texas. Both candidates are going to have to try to appeal to and respect the other supporters and kind of emphasize whatever common ground they may have had. And so they're going to have to come up with a message that kind of resonates beyond the base without alienating people, right?
I was going to ask you, do you think Talarico, I mean, I've read that some people believe he has a better chance of wooing kind of independent voters. You talked about how Jasmine Crockett really has energized the base. And certainly, as you said, a lot of Black voters in Texas. But when it comes to the general, are people comparing the two in terms of who might appeal more to more centrist independent voters?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think that is, we have to be honest about that being something that she's going to have to overcome. But I mean, she's competing. She is, when she's not in Congress casting votes, she is campaigning. And, I think that, first of all, it's challenging for Black politicians to get elected statewide, period. Right. So, I mean, there's already that. If she is elected, if she gets through this primary and then is able to win in November, she'd be only the third Black woman in the Senate. So this is it is an uphill battle for race purposes, for gender purposes in the state of Texas. For many reasons, it is. And so, her continuing to introduce herself to folks beyond the base. We will see if that is a thing that she can do successfully. I heard people talking about her performance in the debate where she had a chance to, people who maybe started to tune into this race on television might have seen her performance and felt, open to this campaign in a way that they may not have been before. But yeah, I think this is what's also interesting to me about this as kind of a preview, I think, too, for the race in the general election is, who gets to claim what it means to be a Texan, and how is that translating to these voters? Do they identify with which candidate do they identify with as a fellow Texan?
It's going to be fascinating. Of course, I think James Talarico got a lot of attention during this whole Colbert thing, as you know, because Aaron aired the interview on YouTube. Colbert said CBS had told him he couldn't broadcast it on the show because the FCC's new guidance on equal time for political candidates. Now, about 7 million people, Errin, have seen the segment on YouTube, which is more than the total viewership who watched The Late Show on Monday.
Yeah.
The Talarico team said they had raised $2.5 million in the 24 hours after the interview aired. So I guess Jasmine Crockett is wishing that she had been scheduled to do the Colbert show and not Talarico, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, but I mean, is she going to be on Colbert now? I mean, there's this equal time kind of argument.
Right.
Will she be invited? Will she show up? What is that
I
going to be?
imagine she will be, don't you
Yeah,
think?
I would have to think that probably is going to happen if it hasn't happened already, right? I mean, because clearly he's gotten a bump off of this. She spoke, she's spoken about this very thing, so I think that she would certainly welcome an invitation to come on Colbert and be able to make her case as well in that forum. Yeah, it is really it's an interesting kind of wrinkle, right? Both of these candidates are trying to raise their profile before this primary election happens. We know that this is going to be, a record-setting race in terms of how much money is raised and spent and all of those things. And so, visibility and exposure right now are probably at a premium, and you can't buy you certainly can't buy the kind of attention and headlines that Talarico is getting as a result of this Colbert drama with the FCC.
I imagine Stephen Colbert is going to feel some pressure to invite Jasmine
I would
Crockett
think so.
to come on his show because I think he's a very fair-minded person, and I think he doesn't want to be seen as favoring one candidate over the other.
And she's been on. She's been on Colbert. She just hasn't been on, obviously, since she announced her Senate run. So,
well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Talarico's under fire. I'm curious how much credence you give to this TikToker. I kind of even hesitate to bring this up, but I know that Stephen Colbert asked James Talarico about it, so I think it's fair game. This TikToker claimed that James Talarico said, "I signed up originally to run against a mediocre black man, not a formidable and intelligent black woman," presumably in reference to Colin Allred, who dropped out of the race. Now, James Talarico saying, "I never said that." Is this getting any kind of traction in sort of political coverage in the state of Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are definitely paying attention to it. And I think that how he is responding to it is the thing that people are also paying a lot of attention to, right? So there's this, what is the impact on public perception? Because this really shifts the conversation from kind of like a policy or persona type race to one where we're talking about character and sensitivity and do you get it as a Democrat, right? So like how he is answering that question, I think is also what voters are that's what they're kind of pointing their ear to. Um, Colin Allred has, called for an apology. And so, how is Talarico responding to that? I think what this does, I mean, this conversation, it kind of speaks to questions of leadership that voters might have, and so to the extent that he can kind of alleviate whatever concerns or fears that they might have around that, I think that is important.
It's
I don't
interesting,
feel like,
Errin. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, um, for people who would try to kind of make this about like an identity politics kind of thing, I don't think it's that. I think it's really more about like representation and respect and lived experience. And so, race and gender can often inform voters, right? And how they assess kind of whether a candidate gets it. And in a state as diverse as Texas, I think that's kind of the broader question that this issue raises.
Interesting to see if it will have any staying power and
Yeah.
how the Talarico campaign handles it, because heretofore it seems like there has been a lot of graciousness and civility between the two candidates.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was definitely the sense I got. I mean, in the debate and just, in terms of how they have engaged with each other, it seems to be, pretty civil. So this, for that to come out was certainly a shift in tone for how this.
Right.
On.
Right. Before we go, I have to ask you about the Republican ticket because obviously John Cornyn is running for reelection for a fifth term. He was most recently elected in 2020 with 53% of the vote. He's up against U.S. Representative Wesley Hunt and Attorney General Ken Paxton. Donald Trump has refused to endorse any of the candidates, which I thought was interesting. How are things looking for John Cornyn at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Donald Trump is somebody who a lot of times will come in the 11th hour for certain people. I guess kind of depending on whatever conversations are had behind the scenes to maybe get him to come there. It would seem to me that Texas is a place where he could be helpful. But what's interesting in that race and in this primary is potential. Who does somebody like a Jasmine Crockett? She's galvanizing a base, but could also potentially be galvanizing Republicans. And then in the general election, does Donald Trump putting his thumb on the scale, who does that galvanize, right? Does that galvanize the people that maybe a John Cornyn would need to win re-election, or does that galvanize people to come out and make sure that the Democratic nominee, whoever that is the person that beats the person that
Right.
Donald wants to win, right? So I think it could be that particular dynamic really interests me, but I think seeing the challengers that John Cornyn has drawn. I mean, this is a five-term senator, and here he is, having to defend that seat against multiple challengers. I think that does, kind of speak to his vulnerability in this, and so it'll be interesting to see kind of how what Republicans are wanting, kind of going forward as well in the state of Texas.
What are do you know what the polls are saying right now?
I've not seen latest poll numbers for the Republican side because I've been pretty locked into what is going to happen with this Democratic race. But it uh, the Republican nominee, I mean, just kind of given the history in Texas, you don't have many Democrats in Texas serving and
Right.
as senators. So you would think that person would have a good chance, but I think turnout, obviously, again, Republicans have a naturally high baseline in Texas elections, but depending on whether Democrats can actually get their voters out, that gap could shrink, if not actually make something happen, which would be very interesting.
According to the El Paso Times, it says Texas Senate race, Ken Paxton leads John Cornyn in new primary poll ahead of early voting. So Ken Paxton is a pretty popular figure in Texas. I know, the Attorney General.
Yeah.
And, Cornyn is running for a fifth term. So we'll see what happens. But very interesting things to cover down in Texas. Aaron
Absolutely.
Haynes of the 19th. Aaron, thanks so much for doing this. And don't be a stranger. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. Anytime. Glad to hang out.
Okay, great to see you. Bye, Errin. Okay, so we're going to end things, you guys, on a fun note because I feel like we need a little palate cleanser. So for that reason, I've invited my friend, Marc Shaiman, who's so fun, who I love, and who isn't usually on Substack, to talk about his new book, New York Times best-selling book, called Never Mind the Happy, Showbiz Stories from a Sore Winner. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Katie. How you doing?
I'm good. Are you near your piano? I'm so glad because honestly, there's been a lot of serious, depressing news, and we need to end things on a light note. And, just doing this Substack, I know is going to keep you on that New York Times bestseller list, Marc.
Gotta keep building this. Thank you, Katie.
I'm so happy to see you. We did a Q&A about the book in our newsletter, Wake Up Call, and it's called Never Mind the Happy Showbiz Stories from a Sore Winner. And everyone, I love Marc Shaiman. He's so ridiculously talented, but he's also such a mensch. And I wanted to basically just have you talk about the book for a few minutes, Marc. It's called, you got Never Mind the Happy from your mom, right?
Yes, it was the morning my mother defined Judaism when my sister called her and said, "Ma, I want to be the first to wish you a happy and healthy new year." And my mother said, "Never mind the happy." So this is what's coursing through my blood and
I
is
want
what, that's where the showbiz stories from a sore winner. Even as all these good things happen to me, I'm always complaining. So someone once said to me, "Marc Shaiman, you are a sore winner." And that's stuck in my head too. So
and ergo the title of your new book. And I wanted to start from the beginning because you are such just this God-given talent. And you told this story. I saw Marc, by the way, being interviewed by Bette Midler here in Los Angeles, and what a treat that was. It was such a fun evening, even though Marc couldn't stop complaining about the keyboard they had provided on stage. But aside from that, it was a really fun evening. I brought my daughter Ellie, and we got such a kick out of it. And Marc, you explained sort of when you first discovered this innate musical talent, really this gift you had. It was because I'm going to set it up, but your sister was taking piano lessons.
yeah, my sister
And
Joyce was taking piano lessons. She finished her lesson and went out to play. And my mom invited the piano teacher up to the kitchen to have a cup of coffee. And while they were up there, they heard my sister's piano lesson being played. I don't know if it was that, but they were like, "Who's playing the piano?" And they ran downstairs and looked over, and there I was, like, I don't know if I could even reach the keys, but I was playing by ear with my little fingers, and they immediately put me into piano lessons a little
what
earlier
happened to
than most kids do.
what happened to poor Joyce?
She kept playing outside. Don't worry, she's had a very good life.
Okay, good. But not nearly as musical as her little brother. So you moved to New York when you're 16 years old, right? Your
Yes.
mom said, "What am I going to do? Chain him to the piano? There's nothing else I can do." But she couldn't convince you to stay in school, go to college. You just took off. Where in New Jersey did you grow up again, Marc?
It's Scotch Plains, New Jersey, exit 135 for anyone listening from New Jersey, they'll understand.
So
Um,
you decided you were just going to pick up and move to New York City.
well, yeah, I mean, I was starting already to get little job offers from, like, I had taken a summer theater course, and the acting teacher had me come into New York when I was still 15 to do sound effects for an evening of Samuel Beckett down at La Mama, down on 4th Street. So she wanted sound effects in a musical fashion. So my parents saw me going into New York, and they saw from community theater. I had started doing community theater when I was 13, 14, 15. So I was out every night, and they saw my determination and my work ethic. And I took the test and I got my diploma. So on the day I turned 16, I had my diploma, and I moved into New York just a few months later, and then had a fairy tale like existence of
Yeah, talk
constantly.
about what happened when you moved to New York City, Marc, because you're right. I mean, you were born, I mean, on a sunny day. That's what my husband used to say, my late husband, about me, but everything kind of went your way.
Yeah, I fantasized working with Bette Midler. Her records just blew my mind, and I fantasized running down the aisle at her concert saying, "Oh, Miss Midler, I know every note of every song. Let me play for you." And then the first people I met in New York lived across the hall from one of her backup singers. So that was what we call Bashert. I mean, all these other wonderful things never would have happened if I hadn't stayed with my new friends on the weekend. And when Bette Midler wanted the girls to come back on the road, she said, "Girls, I'll let you open my act and you come be my backup girls again." They're called the Harlettes. So
Right.
I was flown to LA for one day to teach Bette Midler's band the Harlettes material. And Bette Midler walked in, and I was having my own private Bette Midler concert. And if that's all that ever happened, I would have been happy. But she called out a song to the band. They didn't know it. It wasn't in their music. One of the Harlettes went over to Bette and said, "You see," and Bette called out, "Can you play No Gesturing?" And I actually got to walk to a stage and say, "Oh, Miss Midler, I know every note of every song. Please let me play for you." The literal dream came true. And I was still only maybe I was 18 by that point. I still might have been 17. So it's just crazy. And then one thing after
Wait,
another, like,
yeah, but wait, before can you play No Gesturing? I don't know that song.
no one knows it. It was a little reggae number from her third album that I knew. So thank God I knew that song. No one
And
knew it before or since, but
and then she said basically you have to live in LA if you want to keep working with me, and you decided I'm moving to LA.
yeah, I had such chutzpah. She put me in her pocketbook on that first tour, and because she's a frugal gal, instead of putting me in a hotel, she put me in her guest room of her house. And I'm not even talking about like the guest house in the backyard. No, I went from Bette Midler posters on my wall to living down the hall like she's my sister. And that is the relationship, as you saw that night. We have a brother-sister relationship. The next tour, I was in New York. I heard she was doing a world tour. I called. I said, I'd like to still do the same vocal arranging. She says, I'm only hiring local. I'm not flying anyone in. I'm not putting anyone up. I think I was 19 at this point. I went to an ATM. I took out all my money. I went to JFK. I got on a plane and I called her from a payphone at LAX and said, I'm in LA. Where's rehearsal? What's the address? I had such, can I say balls? Can I say balls
Yes, you
on your
can say
Substack?
balls on Substack. We say a lot worse here.
Yeah, can you believe I did that? I can't believe I did it, but I did it, and I've been that way ever since.
Tell us about sort of the trajectory of your career. So we hear how you start out working with Bette, but you guys have continued not only to be like brother and sister, but you worked on so many of her huge projects. Just kind of give us a little laundry list, Marc, of the
Yeah,
stuff you've worked on with Bette.
with Bet, I mean, the 2 big things I can think of, well, there are a lot, but the final night, final guest with Johnny Carson,
Oh,
that was a night of just perfection. You know, I often beat myself up, as you can tell from my book title and all, but that night, that was perfection. And, that's where, the work I do with her is helping her to choose the songs, choosing material, and choosing that specific song, One for
how
My
did you
Baby.
decide to get her to sing "Give Me One for My Baby and One More for the Road"? That's
She
Johnny Mercer.
Yeah, Johnny Mercer and Harold Arlen. She called and said, "What should I sing? What should I sing?" And she called early that morning. I was taking a shower. I get all my best ideas in the shower. You should join me sometime, Katie.
No, but that's because you're not distracted. But go
Maybe
on.
so. It happens so many times. I've written entire songs in the shower. And I came out dripping wet and I called her. I said, "One for my baby, one for the road." It's a song you sing to a confidant who you've been pouring your heart out to for years and years. And now he just wants to close up shop. And there you go. And then in a similar fashion, when I worked on the movie Beaches, it was my job to help her choose the songs. And so I had heard this song, Wind Beneath My Wings, that had been in around it had been around. I had heard someone singing in a club act. I'd heard Gladys Knight sing it on a record, but no one had had a big major hit with it. And I brought it to Beaches, and it was for a spot where we had all hoped there'd be an original song written, and I wanted to get that spot. But once I said, "Well, here's a template. Here's the perfect song. We should get something like this." And I sang "Wind with My Wings," and the director and the producers, and from that point on, that song had that spot and has, affected millions and millions of people. So
Definitely. And what other projects have you done with that? I mean, I feel like you are always coming up
Hocus
with
Pocus, Hocus Pocus, I helped to arrange, I put a spell on you. And now you're mine, coming up with new lyrics for that. And at the same time, I was working with Billy Crystal, who I met at Saturday Night Live. And both of their film careers took off at the same time, really. So suddenly I was working on When Harry Met Sally and Beaches. And Billy Crystal, the ultimate mensch, he's the one who brought me to Rob Reiner. And
yeah.
I did When Harry Met Sally, and I did every movie Rob did after that point. That's like 16 movies.
And I thought it was amazing. You told the story in the book and when you were interviewed by Bette Marc about the fact that you had never really scored a movie before. And Rob Reiner, and I'd love to talk about Rob for a moment in a minute. Basically, people were saying this guy doesn't know what he's doing, and Rob, in your defense, said talent is talent.
Yeah. I mean, I had almost gotten a job scoring a movie Bette was in called Big Business, but when Jeffrey Katzenberg heard they had hired a kid who'd never scored a movie before, he said, "Uh-uh." So I almost grabbed the brass ring and then was, taken down. But then Rob, even my agent, I just got an agent, and he said to Rob, "What makes you think he could score Misery?" I mean, when Harry Met Sally, that was, the kind of
That was all
music.
kind of arranging our pre-existing songs.
Arranging pre-existing songs. And my agent Richard said to Rob, "Rob, why do you think Marc can compose a film score for Misery, a psychological thriller?" And that's when Rob said, "Richard, talent is talent." And from that point, I owed it to Rob to live up to his faith in me. I had
And
to.
and I mean, is it hard to score a movie, Marc? I
It's
mean,
very hard. You have so much going on. You have to find the emotional, what's going on in the characters, but you have to do it subliminally. You can't be like in a Broadway musical where, someone has to sing because their emotions are so big. In a movie, you have to really watch it. And you have to learn the mathematics. There are 30 frames per second, and every rhythm you choose will affect where the next downbeat will be. And if you want that perfect chord when her face changes expression, you've got to figure out the mathematics and then all the buttons of all the equipment. That's why I stopped smoking pot on the third day of scoring Misery, because I knew I can't be stoned to do this. Oh my God.
you also did First Wives Club, right?
Yes,
Where you scored that as well.
I
And
scored
during
the
your interview with Bette, you played some of the score of a movie that I recently rewatched, An American President, or The American President,
yes,
which is
the
The
American
American
president.
President, with Michael Douglas and Annette Bening. And I wondered if you'd play a little of it because it is so beautiful and it's so moving and patriotic. And I don't know, it filled me with longing when I heard you play it. Will you play a little bit of it?
Yeah, because when I watched the main title of the movie, it was about the respect and stature of the American presidents, I say. Uh, so that's what I had to sum it up. I'll just play a few measures for you.
After you did that and I watched you play it, I went to Spotify and I listened to the soundtrack of The American President. And it's just so beautiful, Marc. And
Thank you.
it really is. And of course, it made me think, obviously, of your relationship with Rob Reiner and how I don't even know the word, how crushing what happened to Rob and his wife, Michelle.
Yeah, we've all lived through grief. I know, obviously, we all have. And you reach a certain age and you've compiled a lot of grief in your life. I lived through the AIDS epidemic. You lost a spouse. But what's happened to Rob and Michelle, there's y- you to grieve, you have to believe it happened. And I still really don't believe it. When he came on the Mel Brooks documentary that's out right now, Rob came on screen talking, and you would have thought my heart would have, but I just like, oh, there's Rob. There's Rob talking the way Rob talks. I still looked at him not believing what has happened. And until I finally believe it, I won't properly grieve. There was one day the New York Times came and interviewed me, and they made a video. And when I played the American president that day, it was a few weeks after. And when I hit the final chord, that was my first moment where I lost it. Just it was real. And hitting a final chord just seemed to, and it was healthy and good that I finally got something out in front of a room full of strangers videoing me, but at least I got a little bit of it out, but it will take a lifetime to try to understand what's happened.
Can
And,
you
Rob
just
and Michelle, I'm a happily married man. a same-sex marriage. And Rob and Michelle fought so hard right up to the Supreme Court. They were such a part of that fight. So I not only owe Rob for my film career and for the beautiful relationship I had, but I'm the happiest married person on earth, and I owe it to them as well.
And I love your husband too. And Marc, talk about um, that the special gift that you think Rob had. Obviously, he recognized your extraordinary talent, and I don't think you would have had the career you've had without Rob Reiner's support. But what else was it about Rob that made him so beloved, not only by moviegoers everywhere when you think of his body of work, but just as a human being?
That has also been helpful. The fact that the whole world felt the same way, and the way that they felt about Rob is who he was. That was no make-believe persona. He was someone who would just talk to everyone and anyone in the same way, look you right in the eye, be interested in what you had to say, and Lord knows he had a lot to say, and he was very opinionated. There was a joke once with our friends of like, "What's that sound?" "Oh, that's Rob Reiner telling a farmer how to grow wheat." I mean, he had an opinion about everything, but he was happy to listen to you as well, and he just embraced everybody. He was just fascinated with life and all sorts of it wasn't just show business. He just loved life.
He was in larger than life. I remember running into him in front of a restaurant last year when we were in California, and he was just walking with Michelle. They were going to meet somebody, and I was like, "Hey, Rob." And, he was just this big, ebullient presence and always so warm and loving and giving. And somebody who I think, much better than I do, really kind of savored every moment of life. I'm sure he had challenges, and it sounds like obviously he had some horrific challenges in his family that ultimately just so tragically led to his death. But talk about a guy who just lived life to the fullest. I think he was that person. I know that one of the things that it got a kick out of you and Bette talking was the fact that you did Sister Act. And I know you talk about Whoopi Goldberg in the book being kind of this kind of shy and retiring person when she was cast in Sister Act, right?
Yeah. Well, when she came over to sing, I was expecting her to be, "Hey, hell," some big bluesy blustering sound, and she came over and she was like, "How many rows must I?" She sounded like Joan Baez, a whiter version of Joan Baez. I was like, "Whoopi, come on." So, I called my friend Jennifer Lewis, who you saw that night, and Charlot, who was one of the Harlettes, and it was my idea of, like, if she has 2 girls who are gonna make her laugh, let's rehearse, and we'll laugh, and we'll laugh, and we got it out of her. We got her to not be afraid of singing. She had never really sung before, but she could sing, but we got it out of her, and then the movie was the huge success it was, and
It
what
was.
a joy it was, that was one of the greatest gigs I ever got, yeah.
Oh my God. And the movie is so fun to watch. And I love Kathleen and Jimmy, who is in it, and obviously Whoopi. But that turned the part down, didn't she?
She said, "My fans don't wanna see me in a wimple." So I say in my book, I made it up. I say, Whoopi said, "Bring on the wimple, bitches." So, I mean, that's her attitude. So, yeah, and then Sister Act certainly showed that, like, the guy who was gonna end up co-writing Hairspray was just waiting for that opportunity because it was the same kind of joyful, celebration of '60s music, you know?
Thank you for that segue because I think your career hit its zenith, really. I mean, obviously the work you had done up until that point was phenomenal, but Hairspray, that was kind of a singular moment for you professionally, wasn't it, Marc? Talk about sort of composing Hairspray. You did it with your former romantic partner and partner, Scott. And just talk about how thrilling that was to put that show together. And when it was such a phenomenal success and spawned a movie and all that jazz, what was that period of your life like? You must have gotten pretty Too big for your britches, no?
I don't know. I think I was too big for my britches long before that. Yeah, from the but it was just a dream. It was a dream and the dream come true. It was everything Scott and I had ever wanted. In the 80s, we were writing musicals and we couldn't get anything on, and the big British musicals were the thing, and we just couldn't catch a break. And then suddenly, 15 years later, after my movie career is what led to me getting Hairspray. And what a fantasy, and everything about it, even when things went wrong on Hairspray, something good came of it. If someone left the cast, someone better came in. We lost our first director, and then our new director and choreographer. It was just amazing. And the fact that it had the sensibility of the shows that Scott and I were writing in the '80s in the East Village on Broadway, so much so that on opening night, they gave me a mic, never do that. So I was making a speech on opening night, but I looked up at that balcony and I said, I just wish I wish the balcony went straight to heaven so that all of our friends who we'd lost to AIDS could be there and celebrate with us. I mean, that was a bittersweet feeling of the ones we most wanted to be there and share that with. We didn't have anymore. But so you see, I found a way to turn even the most wonderful night into never mind the
Into
happy.
something depressing. Thank you, Marc. But then after Hairspray, you've done a number of other musicals, and you also did movies after Hairspray, right? I mean, Hairspray, it might have been the pinnacle, but you kept going. You did, talk about sort of where your career went after that, Marc.
Well, I had just done the South Park movie right before Hairspray, so that was sort of like my peak moment of my in the '90s. But then after Hairspray, my other fantasy, once again, dream come true. As a kid, I listened to the Mary Poppins soundtrack endlessly. That was all I listened to. And then I heard they're making a sequel, and I was gonna get that job no matter what I had to do. And I got it. I couldn't believe. And amazingly, the man who directed the movie Mary Poppins Returns was Rob Marshall, who was gonna direct Hairspray on Broadway and had to drop out when he got the movie Chicago. So full circle, full circle. And then we're nominated for an Oscar. I was nominated for 2 Oscars for that, for the score and for the song that Scott and I wrote, "The Place Where Lost Things Go." And if you wanna talk about a full circle moment, Bette Midler, my favorite performer of all time, sang the song from Mary Poppins Returns, the sequel to my favorite movie of all time, that I co-wrote with my favorite partner at the Academy Awards. I mean, Oprah Winfrey hasn't had such a full circle moment. I mean,
But of course, just to put a button on that, you didn't win.
thank you, Katie, for reminding me. I feel much better now.
You would be an EGOT. You have the E, the G, and the T, right?
Yeah, I'm just an act. Echt.
So, so I still,
So no one has ever gotten to see my O face. Uh,
I want you to win an Oscar, Marc. I want you to win an Oscar. But right now, you did Some Like It Hot on Broadway. What else did you do on Broadway?
what do? We did Catch Me If You Can, Charlie and the
Right.
Chocolate Factory, Some Like It Hot, Smash, Martin Short, Fame Becomes Me. Uh, and now I'm a New York Times bestseller. I never saw that one coming. So,
So excited. 2 weeks in a row, right, Marc?
well, with your help, let's hope so.
Well, no, I thought that it was 2 weeks in a row. No?
Well, Katie, once again, you brought the room down.
Sorry.
No one called
Everyone,
me
you
this
have to
week.
okay, there are 3,100 people on this Substack. You must go
It's a
out
it's a
and
good book.
buy.
It's good.
It is a great book. Marc's a fabulous writer. Obviously, he's an extraordinary raconteur, as they say. And he's funny, he's charming, he's sweet, he has so much heart. And his book is called Never Mind the Happy: Showbiz Stories from a Sore Winner. Um, I am such a fan, Marc. You know that, and I've known Marc for a long time. I went when Marc's what do you call it, caricature was put up at Sardi's.
Right,
I
yeah.
came down like a little groupie to cheer you on,
And
and
remember, I wrote all those lyrics for you on your final day of the Today Show. I don't even know if we knew each other then.
you did.
But oh my God, for Harvey Firestein and the guys from the Jersey Boys, I wrote so many lyrics. And hearing you say thank you said my name. I was like, Katie Couric just said my name.
Oh yeah.
It blew my mind. It did.
Well, I'm very happy to say that we've become friends, and I'm just so proud of you, Marc. I know you say you're retired, but I don't think you should retire. There's so much. The world needs your music, Marc. They need your humor. We need your heart. And so I hope maybe you'll take a break, enjoy your newfound friend as a literary icon and fame as a literary icon, and then get back to the piano. By the way, I have to say, I don't know, I think it's the acoustics. Your piano doesn't sound very good on this Substack.
Well, pianos don't go well often online. They don't. They get like rinky tinky.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
That's kind of good song. Yeah.
well, what do you play? What is your favorite song to play on the piano? Because maybe you could play us off, as they say.
A song of mine, or just a song out there in the world?
Like when you sit down to the piano and you just feel like, you need something cathartic and you just kind of feel like playing something.
Well, for Rob, let's go. You can interrupt if you have to sign off.
No, I love it, actually. It had to be you from When Harry Met Sally. That makes me cry.
It had to be. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you
Thanks.
so much. And by the way,
Thanks.
your piano sounded much better then.
Well, it must be what you said, your magic powers.
Oh, it must have been. Anyway, you all, thank you for watching. Don't forget, go buy Marc's book. And Marc, I'll see you soon. And I'll see you all next week. And I'll be announcing our book club, next book club pick in the next couple of days. Bye, Marc. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so
Love
much.
you. Okay,
Goodbye.
bye. Bye, everyone.